There's a particular kind of fear that only appears when you love a dog the way people really do. Not the casual kind of affection. I mean the bond that rearranges your days, that trains your heart to listen for a set of paws on the floor, that turns a quiet house into something almost sacred simply because they are in it. When you love like that, you eventually learn there is a moment hiding in the future. A moment you don't want to picture, but your mind circles it anyway. The final breath, the stillness, the instant when the body, so warm, so present, so stubbornly alive, becomes quiet. And because we are human, we don't only fear the loss. We fear what it means. We fear the dark story we tell ourselves about endings. We fear that our companion, who trusted us with their whole life, might be afraid in that last second. We fear they might feel alone. We fear that whatever they are, whatever bright awareness looked through those eyes, might simply vanish. In Edgar Cayce's readings, that fear is the first thing that gets challenged. Not with cold philosophy, but with a startling gentleness. Cayce describes death not as a cliff, but as a threshold. Not as a sudden extinguishing, but as a change in state, more like stepping out of one room into another. And then he adds something that, if you really let it sink in, can soften the hardest part of grief. For animals, he says, that passage is often even smoother than it is for us. Why would it be smoother? Cayce's answer is simple and strangely psychological. Dogs don't carry what humans carry. They don't spend years building an anxious identity around control, around future fears, around what if. They don't rehearse their death in the mind for decades. They don't stack belief on top of belief until death becomes a horror story living in the nervous system. A dog lives with remarkable directness. Not naive, just unburdened. Present, sensory, immediate. When something hurts, they feel it. When something comforts them, they receive it fully. And when something ends, they do not wrap it in existential argument. In that frame, death is not an enemy they've spent their life preparing to fight. It is a change they meet the way they meet everything, with a kind of instinctive surrender. Not resignation, trust. So let's slow down and look at the moment itself, the moment we imagine with dread. Cayce would tell you that in the final instant, a dog's consciousness does not turn off. It doesn't collapse into nothingness. It expands. It opens. The way a hand opens when it finally stops gripping. From the outside, the body stills. Breath ends. The muscles soften. The senses stop reporting. But what Cayce points to is something behind the body, something that is not the body. The awareness that was using the body like an instrument does not break when the instrument goes silent. It withdraws from the tight, dense focus of physical life and suddenly finds itself uncompressed. If you've ever watched a dog fall into deep sleep, deeper than a nap, that heavy, complete surrender where the whole nervous system lets go, then you've seen a hint of what Cayce is trying to convey. He describes the transition like a gentle awakening from that deep sleep into a morning filled with light. Not a jolt, not an alarm, not a battle, a soft shift, like drifting upward through warm water until the surface breaks and you realize you were never drowning at all. And here is where the emotional weight of his description becomes almost unbearable in its comfort. He says the pain disappears instantly. Think about what that means for all the endings that are hard to watch. The dog who has struggled with a sick heart. The dog whose joints have stiffened with age until every step looks like a negotiation. The dog who has carried a tumor, or failing organs, or a breath that comes in shallow efforts. In life, we live inside a body that can become a cage. We love them, but we cannot climb into their nerves and take the pain away. We can only do what we do: hold them, soothe them, choose kindness, choose mercy when mercy is needed. Cayce says that in the instant of transition, the body's illness is no longer their reality. There is no more diseased tissue to interpret sensation as agony. There is no more exhausted heart trying to keep rhythm. No more inflammation, no more stiffness, no more weight pulling on old bones. The animal experiences an immediate lightness, not the thin lightness of denial, but the profound relief of being released from limitation. If you want a mythic image for this, because mythology often speaks where ordinary words fail, imagine the old stories where a hero steps out of armor that has been welded to their skin. Imagine unbuckling a burden you forgot you were carrying because you carried it so long. Imagine the first breath after a storm, when the air finally feels like air again. Now, there's another layer to this moment that Cayce emphasizes. During physical life, a dog's perception is filtered through the body's senses. Their world is exquisitely sensory. Smell, hearing, the subtle reading of movement and tone. They know your mood by the pace of your steps. They read your inner weather by the way you touch a door handle. They feel 1,000 things you never notice. But it is still perception through biological receptors, through nerves, through the limits of physical organs. At death, Cayce says those filters fall away. Imagine living in a house your entire life with only one dim lamp in a corner. You know the rooms by memory. You move by habit. You don't question the darkness because it is all you've ever known. Then, in a single moment, every light in the house turns on. Not harshly, beautifully. Suddenly the space is revealed. The walls you thought were boundaries were only shadows. The distance you thought was emptiness is filled with detail. The world becomes wider than your eyes ever told you. That is the kind of expansion Cayce describes. Not an abstract idea, but a lived shift, consciousness freed from the narrow tunnel of physical sensing. The dog begins to perceive layers of reality that were always present, but invisible to the physical eye. Now, if you're listening with a mind of psychology, if you're asking, but what about fear? What about the terror of dying? This is where Cayce's view becomes very specific. He says dogs feel no fear at the moment of death, because fear, as we experience it, is bound up with attachment to the body and attachment to the ego, the story of me that must survive, must control, must not dissolve. Dogs do have fear in life, of course. They can fear a thunderclap, a harsh hand, abandonment, a loud room. But Cayce is pointing to a deeper fear, the existential fear that humans cultivate, the fear of annihilation, the fear of unknown judgment, the fear of losing the self. A dog does not build a philosophical prison around death. They do not rehearse it as a nightmare. So when the threshold comes, it is not met with the same mental resistance. There is an innate trust, a deep knowing without words, a sense that the process is natural, that it belongs, that it is part of the rhythm that carried them through every day they ever lived. And that brings us to the strangest, most tender question, one that almost no one asks out loud because it feels too painful. In that last moment, do they feel us? Cayce's answer is yes. The bond does not snap when the body stops. It doesn't fray and fall away like a rope cut with a knife. In his description, in the first instant after transition, the dog remains very close to the physical plane, close enough to sense your grief as if standing at a doorway, turning back for one last look. And if you've ever been with someone you love as they leave, whether through death or through departure or through a goodbye you didn't want, then you know what that glance back can mean. It is not confusion. It is recognition. It is love acknowledging love. Cayce describes something remarkable happening right there. The dog feels an impulse to comfort you, even from the other side of the threshold. Not because it is obligated, but because that is what love does when it has been trained into the soul. A dog's whole life is a practice in devotion. Their instincts are social, bonded, loyal. If you are hurting, the reflex is to come close, to press against you, to soften you, to bring you back to calm. So in Cayce's telling, their first conscious act after leaving the body is not panic, not loneliness, not loss. It is a wave of love sent toward you, a tranquility offered like a familiar nudge. I am okay. Do not suffer for me. And maybe you felt something like that after loss, something that makes no logical sense. A strange pocket of peace that arrives right inside the worst pain. A warmth in the room when you expected only emptiness. A moment where your chest loosens for no reason and you don't know why. Cayce would say that this is not imagination playing tricks. It is the bond doing what bonds do when they are real, reaching across. The transition, he says, lasts only seconds in earthly time. But for the dog's consciousness, it may feel longer or timeless because the sense of rushing belongs to physical life. The spiritual realm does not move on a clock. And in that timelessness, there's a peace that does not depend on a body being stroked or a bowl being filled or a familiar blanket in the corner. It is a peace born from recognition, a wordless recognition, that their essence was never truly confined to the body. If you hold that idea gently, something shifts in the way you picture the end. The dog is not entering darkness, not falling into a void, not being swallowed by nothingness. In Cayce's view, your companion is entering light. The pain is gone. Fear is absent. The moment you dread is not a moment of terror for them. It is a moment of release. And if that is true, even if you only allow it to be true as a possibility, then the final breath is not the end of the story. It is a turning of a page. The book continues, just in another language. And if the final breath is not the end, then the next question arrives almost immediately. Quiet, trembling, unavoidable. Where do they go right then? Not someday. Not in some distant spiritual horizon. Right then, in the minutes when the room is still warm from their body, when the air feels heavier than it should, when your hands don't know what to do because the simplest task in the world, reaching down to touch them, suddenly carries the weight of an entire lifetime. This is where Edgar Cayce's description becomes intensely intimate, because he doesn't speak as if the dog is instantly erased from the world you share. He speaks as if there's a brief overlap, a delicate window where two realities touch each other like the edges of two waves meeting. In those first seconds, he suggests your dog's awareness remains close to the physical plane, close enough that here is not yet a distant memory, close enough that the bond between you still feels like a living thread, pulled tight, vibrating, unmistakable. And if you've ever sat in that moment, you know how strange time becomes. The clock continues, but your inner sense of time stops behaving normally. A minute can feel like an hour. A sound in another room can feel like it's happening in a different universe. Even your own breathing can feel unfamiliar, as if your body has forgotten its rhythm in sympathy with the body that just stopped. Cayce seems to point to this. The dog is not ripped away. The transition, in the deepest sense, is smooth. And smooth transitions often include a pause, like standing at a doorway before stepping through, looking back, not out of confusion, but out of love. So yes, he says, the dog perceives you, not as a distant thought, not as a faint impression, but as a living presence. And more than that, it perceives what is happening inside you. Your grief is not hidden. Your panic is not hidden. That tightness in your throat, that disbelief, that sudden collapse of all the ordinary structures of your day. Cayce describes these as waves, and your dog feels them the way it has always felt you. Think about how your dog knew you in life. Sometimes better than people did. It knew when you were pretending to be fine. It knew when you were sick before you admitted it. It knew when you were leaving the house and tried to read your face for clues. Will you be gone long? Are you upset? Are we safe? That sensitivity doesn't vanish at the threshold. According to Cayce, it becomes even clearer because the dog is no longer limited by physical senses. It is not just reading your tone of voice or your posture. It is reading the emotional force itself. And something very important happens here. Something that reframes the moment in a way that can soften the guilt people often carry. Your dog does not judge your grief. It does not stand there thinking, "Why are you crying?" or "You should be stronger." It doesn't turn your tears into a story about failure. Dogs don't do that. Their love is not an argument. Their love is not a moral test. It is instinctive devotion, present, immediate, sincere. So when the dog perceives your pain, Cayce says, The dog's first impulse is the same impulse it had when it was alive, to comfort you. That idea, so simple, so tender, can land like a shock, because we imagine death as a severing, a hard line, a door slamming shut. Cayce suggests something else, that the first movement after death is not separation, but connection. You can almost picture it if you let yourself. The dog, newly free from the body, still oriented toward the place where love lives, still oriented toward you. And you, in that raw moment, are still reaching toward the dog with everything you are. Not with your hands, because your hands can no longer hold what you want to hold, but with your heart, with your attention, with the aching magnet of your grief. In Cayce's view, the bond doesn't break. In fact, in those first moments, it can feel stronger. That might sound strange until you remember how bonds work. A bond is not only touch and routine. It's not only feeding time and walks and the sound of collar. A bond is an emotional current. And emotional currents don't require a body to be real. If anything, the body sometimes distracts us from how strong the current already was. We were busy. We were tired. We took things for granted. And then the body is gone. And suddenly we feel the raw truth of the connection, undiluted. So Cayce says the dog sends something to you. A wave, a quiet, steady message. Not in words the way we speak, but in feeling. The feeling that says, I'm okay. I'm not in pain. Don't suffer for me. And this is where so many people quietly admit something they almost feel embarrassed to say out loud. They'll tell you that right after their dog died, they felt something. A calm that didn't match the situation. A warmth. A sudden hush in the mind. Not relief. Not happiness. Nothing that would insult the loss. But a strange peace that arrived like a hand laid gently on the shoulder. Cayce would say, that is not a trick of grief. That is not the brain trying to protect you with fantasy. That is the dog, still close, still present in a way that's difficult to explain with ordinary language. Because if your dog's awareness can no longer lean into you with a physical body, it may lean into you in the only way it can, through presence. And presence, if you've ever felt it, has a certain signature. It's subtle but unmistakable. It has the quality of being both gentle and real. It doesn't feel like imagination because imagination has a kind of effort to it. Presence arrives without effort. It arrives like weather. This is why people describe the same kinds of moments again and again across different homes, different cultures, different beliefs. Someone is sitting on the couch, crying, and they feel a weight beside them, light, familiar, as if their dog hopped up in its usual spot. Someone is lying in bed, eyes open in the dark, and they feel something brush their leg, the way their dog used to do when it wanted reassurance. Someone hears the soft rhythm of paws in the hallway, or the faint jingle of a tag, or a familiar sigh that used to come at the end of a day. Now, to be clear, Cayce isn't saying you should chase these signs, or try to force them, or turn grief into a scavenger hunt for proof. The point is not to become obsessed. The point is to understand the nature of this brief threshold, a time when the dog is still near, and the bond is still active, and love still behaves like love. And here's the piece that matters most psychologically, because it addresses something people feel but don't want to admit. Your dog can feel you, not only your love, your pain. Cayce frames it as an emotional exchange that continues even when the body is gone. If you're shattered, your dog knows. If you're numb, your dog knows. If you're speaking to your dog out loud, whispering into the emptiness of the room because you don't know what else to do, your dog knows. And what does it do with that knowledge? According to Cayce, it leans toward comfort. That doesn't mean the dog is trapped. It doesn't mean the dog is lost. It doesn't mean the dog is wandering aimlessly in confusion. It means that love, in its earliest moments beyond the body, still recognizes its home. And you are that home. This is why the threshold period feels so charged. Your grief is like a beacon. Your love is like a bridge. Not because it believes it must keep living the same day again, but because in the first stretch after death, love still turns toward what it knows. and the dog, in all its loyalty, still turns toward you. If you listen carefully, this becomes a kind of spiritual psychology. It suggests that the intensity of the bond doesn't end with death. It becomes more direct. It becomes less tangled in daily distractions. And that directness is why the first hours can feel haunted, not in a frightening way, but in a holy way. Because love leaves an imprint. And perhaps the greatest comfort in Cayce's view is this: your dog's last experience of you is not your performance. It's your love. Even if you were sobbing, even if you were messy, even if you couldn't speak, even if all you could do was hold their paw and beg time to stop, your dog felt the truth underneath it all. It felt that it belonged. And in this delicate overlap, in this threshold where two worlds brush against each other, it tries, quietly, instinctively, faithfully, to give you the one gift it has always given: calm. Not to erase the grief, because grief is the price of love, but to remind you, even in the first raw hours, that the story did not end in pain. But the final moment, for them, was not darkness. It was release. And somewhere close, closer than distance can describe, something that still loves you is letting you feel, even for a second, that it is all right. And once that first tender overlap begins to thin, once the threshold moment has done what thresholds do, gently shifting the center of awareness away from the dense weight of the physical, another question rises, almost like a lantern being lifted into darkness. If they're not falling into nothingness, then where do they awaken? Not as an idea, not as a metaphor, but as an experience. What does it feel like right after the body is gone? Is there confusion? Is there disorientation? Is it like being dropped into a strange place with no map, no language, no familiar gravity to hold on to? Edgar Cayce's description leans into something that sounds mystical at first, but if you listen closely, it also sounds oddly practical. He suggests that the first moments after death are not identical for every animal. There's a general pattern, yes, but the texture of it depends on something deeply personal: how the dog lived, and especially how the dog died. That single idea changes the tone of everything, because it honors what you already know in your bones, that not all endings are the same. Some dogs leave in a kind of softness, surrounded by familiar voices, gentle hands, a room filled with love. Others leave abruptly, an accident, a sudden collapse, a trauma that gives no one time to prepare. Others leave through illness, where the body becomes a heavy and confusing place, and the final stretch can be an exhausting blur. Cayce isn't claiming that a difficult death condemns the dog to suffering after death. He's careful about that. What he describes is not punishment, not lingering agony, but something more like adjustment, like the mind and awareness recalibrating after being tuned tightly to the physical world. Imagine you've been inside a dim theater for hours, eyes adjusted to darkness, the world reduced to a narrow glow. Then someone throws open the doors and you step into bright morning. The light is beautiful, but for a moment you squint. For a moment, you need to adjust. Not because the morning is dangerous, but because your senses were trained for a different level of brightness. That is the kind of confusion Cayce points to. It's not terror. It's not loneliness. It's an orientation process. For a dog who dies peacefully, he suggests the awakening is clear and smooth. There's a sense of immediate rightness, even if everything looks different, even if the rules have shifted. It's like waking up in a room you've never seen before and yet feeling, somehow, that you belong there. A quiet certainty, a recognition without words that something has changed, but nothing essential has been lost. That matters because we often project our own fears into the unknown. We imagine our dog opening its eyes into a cold void, panicking, searching for us, confused by darkness. Cayce's picture is almost the opposite. He describes the astral as an environment that is responsive to the being's consciousness. Not fabricated fantasy, not a cartoon heaven, but a realm where experience is shaped more directly by inner nature than by external objects. So for a dog, an animal whose inner nature is not built on abstract worry or self-torture, the atmosphere is not hostile. It's not an interrogation chamber. It's not a place designed to frighten. It feels, in his telling, natural, nurturing, familiar in a way that doesn't require the same furniture and walls. Because familiarity is not only physical, it's energetic. A dog knows home as a feeling, a tone, a sense of safety, the way your presence changed the air in the room, the way love lowered the nervous system into trust. Cayce suggests the first astral environment reflects that kind of knowing. The dog awakens into an emotional climate that matches its essence more than it matches any earthly location. But what about the dogs whose deaths were sudden or traumatic? Here, Cayce speaks with a kind of compassion that doesn't sugarcoat reality while still refusing despair. He suggests that a dog who dies in shock may have an initial moment of disorientation, not because it is lost, but because the consciousness was torn quickly from the physical framework. In life, the dog's awareness is braided tightly into the body's rhythm. There is the heartbeat, the breath, the rush of sensation, the instinct to react. A sudden death can be like an abrupt cut in the music. So the first moment after such a death may include a brief, "What happened?" Not in words, not as a philosophical question, but as a felt mismatch. The old framework is gone, and the new one hasn't fully stabilized. That mismatch can feel like drifting for a moment before the new ground becomes solid. And yet, even here, Cayce insists it is brief. Minutes, perhaps, hours in earthly terms at most. Because, he says, time does not function in the spiritual realm the way it does here. That line is easy to hear and difficult to truly grasp. We're so trained by clocks, by schedules, by the nervous urgency of physical life. We experience time as pressure. Even in love, we feel it. We say, "I wish I had more time." We count days since loss. We count weeks. We measure grief like a calendar is supposed to make the immeasurable manageable. Cayce suggests that in the astral plane, time is not experienced as a straight line you're dragged along. It's not a conveyor belt. It's more like a field, responsive, elastic, shaped by attention and experience. That's why what might be a few minutes of adjustment can feel like a complete and thorough settling. The consciousness is not being rushed. It is not being forced to figure it out under pressure. There's a deep psychological relief in that idea. Because one of our biggest fears is that our dog might be stranded in confusion, unable to understand what's happening. Cayce's view is that understanding does not require verbal explanation. Animals don't need a lecture about metaphysics. They know through direct perception, through feeling, through the immediate feedback of experience. So the dog awakens, and the very first lesson is delivered not by words, but by reality itself. The old limitations are gone, and this new state responds differently. Not necessarily with fireworks or spectacle, but with unmistakable evidence that the mode of being has changed. And here, the astral realm becomes less like a foreign country and more like a deeper layer of the same universe. A layer that was always present, but usually unseen. Cayce's language implies that the dog is not transported to some distant place. It is shifting frequency, shifting vantage point, shifting level of perception. That's a subtle but important distinction, because it means the dog is not lost in distance. It is not traveling away from you, as though love must chase it. It is simply no longer confined to the narrow channel of physical sensing. It is perceiving more of what already exists. This is why he uses imagery like light and awakening. The world doesn't disappear. It reveals itself. If the dog's life was full of safety and affection, then that revelation is met with calm. The dog's nature, shaped by love, meets the new reality and says, in essence, yes. This is okay. This is real. I can be here. If the dog's life included fear, abandonment, or trauma, then the revelation might come with a brief tightening, Again, not endless suffering, but a moment of cautious scanning, like a rescued dog entering a new house for the first time. The room is safe, but it takes a moment to believe it. The dog's consciousness may still carry reflexes from physical life. Hypervigilance, startle response, the expectation that the world is unpredictable. Cayce's view implies that these reflexes don't vanish just because the body ends. They are patterns in consciousness, and patterns, even gentle ones, unwind in a process. So the first awakening may include a kind of scanning. Where am I? What is this? Is it safe? The answers are not delivered as text on a wall. They are delivered as a felt atmosphere, a sense that there is no threat, a sense that the environment is not pressing in, a sense that nothing is demanding, a sense, gradually, that the dog can relax. That relaxation is the true marker of orientation. Because in physical life, the body often dictates the mood of consciousness. When the body is in pain, consciousness tightens. When the body is weak, the world shrinks. When breath is hard, reality becomes small and urgent. Cayce suggests that once the body's pressure is removed, consciousness begins to widen again, and with it comes the ability to settle and to trust. And something else begins to happen, something mythic, almost if you let the imagery breathe. The dog's identity, which in life was expressed through the body, through habits, routines, physical cues, begins to express itself more directly as essence. The dog is still itself, still the same unique presence you knew. But the self is no longer filtered through hunger, pain, fatigue, or the need to protect a fragile body. So what is left is the pure tone of the being. This is where the grandeur creeps in quietly, not as grand speeches, but as the sheer wonder of the idea that the love you knew in your dog was not an accident of biology, not a trick of neurons, not merely instinct. Cayce's telling suggests it was a soul expression, an energy that used the body as a channel, but was never truly limited to it. And if that's true, then the first awakening in the astral plane is not just a continuation of existence. It's a clarification of what existence always was underneath the surface. Now, none of this removes your grief. Your grief still lives in your hands, your throat, your routines, your empty spaces. But this picture changes what you imagine happening over there. It replaces panic with a kind of unfolding. It replaces the idea of darkness with the idea of adjustment to light. It replaces the fear of abandonment with the possibility of orientation. And most of all, it suggests that the dog's first days are not filled with terror and confusion. They are filled with recalibration, with settling, with a gradual, natural recognition. Something ended, yes, but something also began. A different way of being, a different way of seeing. And as that awareness stabilizes, as the last echoes of physical shock dissolve, the dog comes into clarity the way a lake comes into stillness after wind. The surface quiets. The reflection forms. The new world becomes readable, not with the eyes, with the soul. And when the surface of that inner lake finally stills, when the last ripples of adjustment fade and the dog's awareness settles into its new rhythm, something happens that is so immediate, so unmistakable, that it becomes the first real proof to the dog that the transition was not a loss of life, but a release into a larger kind of life. It moves, not as a memory, not as a ghost drifting in confusion. It moves with intent, and it discovers, almost at once, that movement is no longer negotiated through pain. This is one of the most striking threads in Cayce's descriptions. The idea that the animal becomes aware very quickly that its body functions differently. He speaks as if the dog still has a form, an astral form, responsive and coherent. But that form is no longer bound by the limitations of physical tissue. It is not dragged down by stiff joints. It is not slowed by fatigue. It is not pinched by arthritis or weighed by tumor or constrained by failing organs. If you've ever watched an old dog stand up, shifting its weight carefully, choosing which paw to place first. You know how heartbreaking it can be. You can see the will, still bright, still eager, working against the body's decline. You can see how the mind wants to go where it always went, but the body has become a reluctant partner. Even the way they walk can change. Shorter steps, slower turns, a careful hesitance, as if each movement is asking permission from pain. Cayce's picture flips that completely. The dog moves, and suddenly there is no argument from the body. The impulse to run is answered by running. The desire to leap is answered by leaping. The instinct to spin in a circle, to chase, to play, to be light, these things are not blocked by soreness or weakness. They happen. It's difficult to explain what that means without making it sound sentimental. But if you really imagine it, if you bring to mind the specific dog you've known, the way their personality used to flash through movement, then you can feel why Cayce calls it joyful. It is not just being alive, it is being unburdened. And that unburdening doesn't only apply to age. Cayce includes the dog who lost sight, who lost hearing, who lived in a dimmed world at the end. He suggests that perception in the astral is clearer than it was even in youth. Not because the eyes and ears are repaired like mechanics fixing parts, but because the dog is no longer perceiving reality solely through organs. It is perceiving more directly. So picture a dog that became blind in its later years. In life, it learned to map the house by smell and memory, to trust the familiar paths, to hesitate at new spaces. It adapted, but it lived inside a narrowed world. In Cayce's view, the moment the dog awakens in the astral plane, that narrowing falls away. The dog perceives again completely, not struggling to see with failing receptors, but sensing the environment in a fuller, more immediate way. And what happens when a being that has been constrained suddenly experiences full capacity? Euphoria. Cayce describes a kind of spontaneous joy, almost a bursting in those first moments. The dog isn't merely calm. It is thrilled, and not in the human sense of abstract happiness, in the animal sense of pure vitality, like a young dog racing across a field because the body is a celebration of itself. This is where the mythology in his descriptions begins to shine through. Many traditions speak of a second body, a subtle body, a luminous form that carries identity beyond physical death. Cayce's language isn't academic, but it echoes that idea. The dog finds itself in a form that feels like a body, but without the heaviness of physical loss. And then he adds a detail that changes everything. The dog can move by thought. In physical life, movement is a chain. Intention forms, signals travel through nerves, muscles contract, paws push against ground, gravity resists, fatigue accumulates. It's a beautiful chain, but it is a chain. It takes time. It takes effort. It takes bodily cooperation. In the astral, Cayce suggests that chain is shorter, so short it almost disappears. Thought and presence are joined. Want to be there? You're there. Want to be near a familiar place? You're near it. Want to turn, to run, to explore? There is no delay, no sluggish body asking for rest. This idea can sound like fantasy if you keep it as an idea. But in the context of the story Cayce is telling, it functions like a natural law of a different realm. The astral plane is less dense, more responsive, and consciousness shapes experience more directly. And this is where something deeply touching happens, something that explains why so many people feel their dog around them in the hours and days after death. Because if movement is guided by thought, then what is the first thought many dogs have? You. Not because they're miserable there, not because they're trapped, not because they're frightened and searching for rescue, but because love is a magnet, and the bond is still fresh, still pulsing, still unbelievably real. Cayce says many dogs try to return in those first moments. Again, not as a tragic haunting, more like a reflex of connection. They think of you, and instantly they find themselves in the physical environment where you are. This is such an important distinction. The dog is not stuck between worlds. It is not wandering in a gray fog, lost. It is simply discovering that, in its new state, it can traverse dimensions with ease. It can be near you without a body. It can visit the familiar home the way a thought visits a memory. Except it's not only memory. In this telling, it's presence. So you might feel something, a shift, a softness in the room, a sensation that makes you look up as if expecting to see them step around the corner. You might catch movement in the edge of your vision. You might feel a familiar pressure at your side when you sit down. And you might wonder, am I imagining this because I miss them? Cayce would say no, not necessarily. He would say, in the first phase, your dog is still close enough to the physical plane that it can perceive it clearly. And because thought and presence are so closely linked, the dog can come near you as easily as it once walked into a room. But here's the part that makes this feel less like a ghost story and more like spiritual psychology. Cayce doesn't describe the dog returning endlessly, trapped in habit. He describes it returning as part of a natural processing of separation. Just as you're processing that they are gone, they are processing that their form has changed. The love remains, but the rules are different now. The dog needs to recognize that difference, not through explanation, but through lived experience. So it comes close. It visits. It checks. It senses your grief. It sends comfort. It explores its new freedom. It begins to understand that it can love you without living in the same density. And gradually, this realization becomes clear. It cannot remain permanently in the physical environment, not because it is banished, but because it is evolving into a different mode of being. Cayce hints that this clarity arrives naturally. The dog doesn't need a lecture. It learns by moving, by feeling, by noticing the new rules. It learns that it can traverse, but it also learns that its new home base is not the old house. It's the astral environment where its consciousness is now most naturally aligned. So the first days become an interplay. The dog experiences exhilaration, freedom of movement, relief from pain, restored capacity, and it also experiences loyalty, turning back toward you again and again as if to say, I'm here. I'm still me. I still love you. And if you listen carefully, you can feel the deeper meaning of this. It suggests that what you loved in your dog was not the body itself. The body was the vessel. The love was the essence. And when the vessel is set down, the essence doesn't vanish. It becomes more mobile, more responsive, more luminous. This is where the grandeur of the story shifts from tragedy to awe. Because if Cayce's view is even partly true, then the dog's first experience after death is not emptiness. It is capability. It is aliveness without strain. It is an expanded field of perception where the old suffering is no longer the center of attention. And that matters for you too, because so much grief is fueled by the image of your dog suffering somewhere beyond your reach. Cayce replaces that image with another, your dog discovering it can run again. Your dog feeling light. Your dog moving with the effortless joy it once had as a puppy, but with a calmness that puppies don't yet understand. Yet even as the dog explores this freedom, one truth remains at the center of everything. It is not alone. Not in the way our fear imagines. In the moment it begins to sense presences, other energies, familiar essences, welcoming forms, its joy becomes something more than personal relief. It becomes reunion, because now the dog isn't just moving through a new world. It is being received by it. That sense of being received is the pivot point. The moment the whole experience stops feeling like a solitary crossing and begins to feel like a homecoming. Because once the dog has tasted its freedom, once it has moved and realized there's no pain dragging behind it, once it has turned back toward you and sensed that the bond still holds, there comes a recognition that changes the emotional temperature of everything. It is not alone. Not in the way we imagine loneliness, with empty space and silence and abandonment. Cayce describes something far more intimate. Presences, near presences, familiar presences, Energies that the dog knows the way a dog knows you, not through reasoning, but through that instant, full-bodied certainty of recognition. And in that recognition, any lingering confusion dissolves, not because someone explains a doctrine, but because love itself orients the soul. Love is a compass. It points you toward what is safe. It points you toward what is real. Cayce was unusually specific here. He suggested that dogs are received, guided, gathered into a kind of community immediately after death. The astral plane, in his view, is not a sterile void where consciousness floats in isolation. It is a living environment populated by beings at different stages of development, some newly arrived, some long established, some actively serving as guides. Now, if you've spent any time with mythology, you'll recognize this pattern. In the old stories, no one crosses the river alone. There's always a ferryman, a guide, an ancestral presence waiting at the far bank. Different cultures tell it differently. Some speak of guardians of the gate. Some speak of ancestors who come to meet the dying. Some speak of psychopomps, the soul guides that escort beings through thresholds. Cayce's language is modern, but the pattern is ancient. A loving intelligence meets you at the border. For dogs, he suggests, that meeting is profoundly tailored to their nature. Dogs are relational beings. Their souls, if we use Cayce's frame, are shaped by bonds. They make family out of whoever loves them. They build loyalty into their identity. So it makes sense, at least within this worldview, that the first hands reaching for them would be hands they already know or energies they can trust instantly. The first type of presence Cayce describes is perhaps the most emotionally vivid: other animals. Not just any animals, but animals that have already crossed, often animals who belong to the same field of love. If you've ever had more than one pet, you understand that there's a kind of invisible household that forms, not just a collection of bodies, but a shared atmosphere, a shared emotional ecosystem. A cat that lived in the same home a decade earlier still left a signature. A dog that died before your current dog arrived still shaped the feeling of that family in ways you might not even notice until you look back. Cayce suggests those animals can be part of the welcoming party, and the way he frames it is almost startling in its tenderness. Reunion happens with explosive joy, more intense than anything you've seen in physical life. Not because physical life is lacking, but because physical life is limited. Bodies get tired, time interrupts, illness dulls, distance separates. In the astral, those constraints loosen, and the joy of recognition becomes something pure and immediate. Picture it like this: your dog, newly free, newly able to run without pain, senses a presence and turns. Maybe it is the old dog you once had, the one that died when you were younger, the one whose collar you can still picture. Maybe your current dog never met that dog in the physical world, never shared a room, never chased a toy together. But Cayce suggests recognition doesn't require physical coexistence. Souls know each other beyond the timeline of the body. That idea can feel strange until you consider how love actually works. Love is not only an event, it is a field. It has continuity. It leaves traces. A dog that arrives into your home arrives into a space already shaped by love. By your love, by the love you've given before, by the emotional patterns that have become your family. In Cayce's telling, the dog doesn't just recognize a former pet's face. It recognizes the shared household essence, the shared belonging. And that reunion, he implies, is stabilizing. It gives the newly arrived dog an immediate anchor. I am safe. I am among friends. I am understood here. But Cayce goes further. He introduces a second type of presence that feels almost mythic, what he called animal guardians. These are not simply pets that died earlier. These are evolved animal spirits, beings who have developed to a point where they choose a role. They do not immediately reincarnate. They remain in that transitional zone as helpers, guides, mentors, still in animal form. still communicating in the wordless language of energy and feeling, but carrying a kind of wisdom about passage. It's hard not to feel the beauty of that image. A dog whose whole life was an apprenticeship in loyalty, now stepping into a reality where loyalty itself has become a vocation. A being that once comforted humans, now helping other animals find their way. If you listen psychologically, you can hear what Cayce is trying to address: the fear of disorientation. We worry our companion will be confused, lost, overwhelmed. Cayce responds by implying that the structure of the astral plane includes support systems, beings whose job is to smooth the transition, to transmit calm, to interpret the new environment through direct energetic reassurance. Not by forcing the dog to change its nature, but by letting it be itself while it adjusts. If the dog was playful, it plays. If it was protective, it still has protective impulses. If it was anxious in life, it may still carry that pattern for a short time. The guardians don't scold these traits out of existence. They receive the dog as it is, then gently widen its world. And the third type of presence Cayce describes is the one that surprises people most: human beings. Not random strangers, not a faceless crowd. He speaks of humans who had a special connection with animals in their earthly life. Caretakers, protectors, people whose love for animals was not casual, but defining. These human souls, he suggests, choose to remain close to the planes where animals transition, offering comfort and care the way they did in life. And sometimes, Cayce implies these human presences can be family. A grandfather who loved dogs. A relative who had a soft heart for animals. Someone you may not even have met, yet who is part of the lineage of love that shaped your home. In the spiritual realm, he suggests the family field is larger than the family you can name. The threads extend farther than your memory. Now, the key detail here is not the spectacle of who appears. The key detail is recognition. Cayce suggests the dog recognizes the energy of home in these presences, not because it understands genealogy, but because it feels the same love signature it felt with you. It senses kinship the way animals sense it, through direct resonance. So the dog awakens into a community of care, familiar animal souls, guardian animals, and human caretakers whose love for animals made them natural companions in this threshold space. And that community doesn't simply show up to celebrate. It has a function. It helps the dog understand what happens next. But again, understanding here is not a lecture. It's orientation through felt experience. The dog is shown, guided, soothed, and gradually introduced to the logic of the new realm. A place where movement follows thought. A place where time is elastic. A place where the dog can still feel you, can still send love to you, but cannot remain anchored to the physical in the same way. This is where Cayce includes one of the most important and delicate elements in his account. Among the beings who greet the dog, there is usually at least one whose specific role is to help the dog navigate the bond with you. Because that bond is powerful. If you've ever loved a dog deeply, you know it can feel like something more than companionship. It can feel like a vow, a spiritual contract written in daily routines. And when the body ends, the vow doesn't evaporate. It continues as an energetic line. Cayce suggests that line must be tended, not severed. The dog needs to know you can still feel you're human. You can still love your human. You can even visit in ways that are subtle. But you cannot cling to the physical plane as though the old life must be repeated forever. There is a journey ahead. There is growth. There is healing. There is an unfolding of consciousness that requires movement forward. That's where the guardian's role becomes almost like a wise friend standing beside the newly arrived dog and saying, without words, you are not abandoning your human by moving on. You are not betraying love by evolving. Love is not a leash. Love is not a chain. Love is the center, and you can carry it with you as you expand. If you listen closely, you'll notice how Cayce's view quietly corrects a common fear on both sides. Humans fear their dog will forget them. Dogs, in this telling, may initially feel such a strong pull toward the human that they keep returning not out of misery, but out of devotion. The guardians help the dog hold the bond without becoming consumed by it. That's a deeply psychological insight wrapped in spiritual language. It's the difference between attachment and love. Attachment clings because it fears loss. Love moves because it trusts connection. So the welcoming isn't just comforting. It's stabilizing. It gives the dog permission to relax into its new home, to explore, to heal, to expand, without feeling that doing so means leaving you behind in some final, tragic way. And it gives you, though you may not consciously know it, a different image to hold in your grief. Not an image of your dog alone in darkness. Not an image of your dog wandering lost, but an image of your dog being met, being guided, being surrounded by a community of care that understands exactly what a loyal heart feels like at the edge of worlds. Which means the bond between you and your dog is not only surviving, it is being held on both sides. And held bonds, tended bonds, don't snap. They transform. And transformation is exactly what those first days are. Love learning a new shape. If Cayce is right, the dog doesn't vanish the moment the body stops. It shifts, and for a little while, that shift keeps it close to the places where its love was practiced. The doorway you both watched, the corner where it slept, the path it followed behind you like a quiet shadow. This is why the days after can feel so strangely alive, as if the house itself is holding its breath. You're not only missing a routine, you're sensing a change in presence. Cayce describes what he called an immediate vigil, a short span, often 3 to 7 days, when the dog remains especially near the physical plane. Not trapped, not punished, not confused in a fog, but close in the way a song stays in the air after the musician stops playing. The notes are no longer being produced by strings and fingers, yet the vibration lingers. In those first days, the bond is still vibrating. You can feel why this would happen, even without mysticism. Love is attention. Love is repeated focus over years. Love is the way two nervous systems learned each other's rhythms until you could sense one another without words. When the body ends, that practiced focus doesn't instantly dissolve. The dog still turns toward you. You still turn toward it. And in Cayce's view, thought and presence are intimately linked on the other side. So when your attention reaches out, it becomes a bridge. This is where his language becomes almost clinical in its tenderness. He suggests that dogs perceive your emotions like waves, dense or bright, heavy or warm, more like color and vibration than like sentences. Your grief arrives as weight. Your love arrives as light. And the dog responds the way it always did, not by analyzing your reasons, but by trying to change the quality of the room inside you. That's why, in Cayce's telling, the first days often include those impossible moments. You're crying, and you feel a familiar pressure beside you, not strong enough to frighten you, just enough to make you look up. You catch yourself listening for pause. You half-turn because you feel watched with affection. You wake in the night, and for one breath you are sure it's there. And then your mind remembers, and the grief hits again. Cayce would say the first part was not simply denial. It was contact. But here's the part that matters most, because it keeps the story from becoming a haunting. The dog's intention during these visits is comfort, not clinging. It is not replaying life because it cannot accept death. It is offering something it knows how to offer, calm, while it learns to live in a different dimension. It walks the familiar spaces the way you might revisit photographs after a loss. Not because you're lost, but because you're honoring a bond and letting the new reality settle in. And if it can return by thought, then your thought becomes a kind of invitation. Not a ritual, not a spell, just the simple truth that attention has weight. When you stare at its photo and whisper, "I hope you're okay," Cayce suggests that message doesn't evaporate into air. It crosses. The dog receives it not as words, but as unmistakable feeling. You are reaching for me. This is why he places so much importance on how you grieve. not in the cruel way people sometimes say move on, as if love were disposable. Cayce's view is more nuanced and more compassionate. Grief is real, but grief is also energetic. If you remain in raw, inconsolable suffering, the dog feels it as a heavy wave. And because its instinct is to comfort you, it may choose to remain close longer than it otherwise would, delaying its fuller integration into the astral life it's meant to grow into. Notice what that implies. It doesn't blame you for pain. It doesn't claim your tears hurt the dog in some moral way. It says your pain calls to the dog the way a cry calls to a loyal heart. And the dog responds. It stays. It circles near you. It tries to soothe. So the most loving thing you can do, in Cayce's frame, is not to pretend you're fine. It's to let grief move and slowly, when you're able, to let it change form from despair into gratitude. Because gratitude is not denial. Gratitude is grief that has found meaning. It's the moment you can say, through tears, thank you for your life, thank you for your love, and I want you to be free. That release is not a dramatic ceremony. It can be as simple as closing your eyes and speaking from the heart, out loud or silently. I love you. I miss you. But you don't have to stay here for me. Go where you need to go. I will carry you. We will meet again when the time is right. Cayce suggests that when you do this, something paradoxical happens. The connection doesn't weaken. It purifies. It becomes less tangled in desperate longing and more like a steady, luminous thread. And the dog, feeling that change, can move forward with lightness instead of hesitation. Dreams are where this becomes most vivid, and Cayce treats them as more than grief's theater. He argues that sleep shifts your consciousness closer to the frequencies of that astral plane, making meetings possible in a way waking life rarely allows. That's why dreams soon after death can feel different from ordinary dreams, brighter, steadier, emotionally coherent, like stepping into a place rather than watching a story. If you dream of your dog in those first days, healthy and young and running the way it used to, Cayce would say, pay attention. Not because you need proof, but because the dream may be a message, a reassurance, a simple translation of the dog's state into images your mind can hold. I'm well. I'm light. I can move. I'm still me. And sometimes the dream is quieter. The dog simply looks at you, close enough that you can feel the familiar intelligence in the eyes. No chase, no spectacle, just presence. That, too, is a kind of communication. In Cayce's view, the dog is not trying to deliver philosophy. It's trying to deliver peace. This is also why people so often report that the intensity of signs fades after the first week. Cayce's pattern suggests a gradual shift. The immediate vigil is close and frequent. Then, over the following weeks, visits become less obvious, not because love diminishes, but because the dog is integrating more fully into its new environment, healing impressions from its life, expanding beyond old patterns. The physical plane becomes less central, not because it's forgotten, but because it's no longer home. Still, that doesn't mean the bond goes silent. In Cayce's telling, distance doesn't exist the same way. Thought remains a bridge. If months later you suddenly remember your dog with a sharp tenderness, you may feel an unexpected warmth, a softening in the chest, as if something answered. You might not see anything, but you might feel the reply in the only language that matters, calm. And that brings us back to the hardest truth of love. Grief is not a problem to solve. It's a passage you walk. Cayce's view doesn't erase the ache of an empty house. It doesn't replace the missing weight at your feet, but it offers a different picture of what your dog experiences in those first days. Less like abandonment, more like a careful, loving transition, less like darkness, more like a widening into light. So if you're sitting in those first days right now, and the house feels too quiet, and your mind keeps returning to that final moment, let the story shift. Imagine your dog free of pain, moving easily, surrounded by presences that know how to guide a loyal heart. Imagine it turning toward you not with sadness, but with that familiar impulse to comfort. And when you can, give it the gift of release, not as forgetting, but as love that trusts the bond will hold even when you let it breathe. In the end, what Cayce offers is not a demand that you believe. It's an invitation to hold your grief with a wider lens, to remember that the love you shared was not a small thing. It trained you. It softened you. It taught you devotion in a language older than words. And if love is real, and you know it was, then love is not suddenly made unreal by a stopped heart. So when you miss your dog, miss it honestly. Let the tears come without shame. Then, when the tears pass and you can breathe again, speak to it the way you always did, with that quiet sincerity dogs understand better than anyone. If you want to light a candle, or sit where it used to rest, do it not to summon anything, but to honor what was sacred in ordinary days. Let your memory become a warm place instead of a wound. If Cayce is right, that warmth reaches farther than you think. It also reaches inward, loosening the guilt that often follows loss. You did what love could do in a mortal world. You stayed, you cared, you chose kindness. Let that be enough, and let your heart rest today. And when the nights are hardest, remember the simplest image, not an ending, but a threshold. Not a fall into darkness, but a step into light. Your dog's story did not conclude in fear. It concluded in release. And whatever comes next for you, the bond remains subtle, invisible, and strangely steady, like a thread that doesn't need to be seen to be strong. One day, in whatever way the circle completes, you will recognize that presence again. Until then, let love do what it has always done. Keep you connected, keep you human, keep you moving forward with tenderness.